There's something no one has told you about your own home, something that explains why you feel exhausted even after you've rested, why your energy just vanishes for no apparent reason, why inner peace seems impossible to maintain when certain people are around. Eckhart Tolle spent years studying this phenomenon. And what he discovered will completely change how you see who walks through your front door. Have you ever noticed that some people leave you feeling completely drained after just a few minutes of conversation? It's not a coincidence. It's not a weakness on your part. There's an invisible mechanic happening, an energy transfer that most people don't even know exists. And your home, the place where you should feel most protected, may be the perfect setting for this silent draining. Today, I'm going to reveal the 3 types of people that Tolle identifies as real dangers to your sacred space. People you probably know. People you may have let into your life without realizing the damage they were causing. But before we get there, I need you to understand something fundamental that will change everything. Tolle teaches that we live in 2 main states. The first is the state of presence, where we are conscious, alert, connected with the moment. In this state, there's a quality of attention that transcends compulsive thinking. You are here, now, completely. The second is the state of unconsciousness, where the ego takes over and operates automatically, seeking conflict, drama, and external validation. In this state, the mind is constantly in the past or the future, never in the present. Most people, according to Tolle, live predominantly in the second state, without even realizing it. And this creates a very specific dynamic when 2 people interact. When 2 unconscious people interact, their egos feed each other. There's drama, there's conflict, there's a whole dance of projections and reactions. But when a conscious person interacts with an unconscious one, something very different happens. The ego of the unconscious person feels an existential threat, because presence, by its very nature, exposes the illusion of the ego. And here's the problem. When you start to awaken, when your consciousness expands, you become like a light in a dark room. And that light attracts 2 types of reactions. Some people are genuinely drawn to the clarity and peace that you emanate. They sense something different in you and want to be closer to that quality. But others, the deeply unconscious, who feel a profound threat, their ego detects your presence as a danger, and automatically, without them even realizing it, they start trying to extinguish your light. This isn't conscious malice. It's an automatic response of the ego in survival mode. This brings us to the first type of dangerous person that Tolle warns you to keep away from your home: the chronic emotional vampire. This is perhaps the most common and the most difficult to identify initially. Recent research in psychology, published in 2024 by Psychology Today, confirms what Tolle has been teaching for decades. There are people whose pattern of interaction is fundamentally extractive. They don't know how to generate their own energy, so they survive by draining the energy of others. And it's important to understand that this is not a conscious choice. It's an unconscious pattern that has developed over years, often starting in childhood. How do you recognize this type? Pay attention to how you feel before and after interacting with them. Studies show that the brain normally consumes 20% of the body's oxygen and calories. But when we are under constant stress and vigilance, that consumption increases dramatically without us even realizing it. And that's exactly what happens in the presence of an emotional vampire. Your nervous system goes into a state of alert. Your body spends energy trying to process the negativity that's being directed at you. They arrive at your house, and immediately the atmosphere changes. The conversation always revolves around their problems, the injustices they suffer, how cruel the world is, You offer solutions, they reject them. You offer perspective, they dismiss it. You try to change the subject, they go back to the problem. What they want isn't help. What they want is your energy, your attention, your emotional involvement. They want you to feel what they feel. They want to drag you down to the same level of vibration they're on. Tolle explains this brilliantly in The Power of Now. He says that the ego in a state of unconsciousness is always in survival mode. And one of the ways it survives is by creating drama, conflict, problems that never have a solution. Because if the problem were solved, the ego would lose its source of identity. So it keeps the problem alive, and along with it, drains your vital energy. The emotional vampire's ego needs problems, needs injustices, needs things going wrong, because that's what it feeds on. But here comes something that few understand. The emotional vampire rarely knows they're a vampire. They genuinely believe they're just sharing their difficulties, that they need support, that they're being vulnerable by opening their heart. And this makes the situation even more complex, because you may feel guilt for pulling away. You may feel that you're being selfish, that you're abandoning someone in need. But Tolle is absolutely clear about this. Protecting your energy is not selfishness, it's wisdom, it's spiritual responsibility. You can't help anyone if you yourself are being drained to exhaustion. Which brings us to a crucial question. How do you protect your home from this first type? The answer lies in what Tolle calls the field of presence. This is a fundamental concept that completely changes the dynamics of interactions. When you cultivate presence, something extraordinary happens. You generate a field of energy around you of high vibrational frequency. No unconsciousness, no negativity. No drama can enter that field and survive, just as darkness cannot exist in the presence of light. This isn't a metaphorical concept. It's an energetic reality that you can experience directly. This means that you don't necessarily need to cut all the emotional vampire types out of your life. What you need is to be so anchored in presence that the dynamic changes automatically. When you don't react, when you don't get involved in the drama, when you remain as an observing witness instead of an emotional participant, the emotional vampire loses their food. The energy they were seeking to extract is simply not available. And eventually, either they change their approach, or they naturally move away seeking a more accessible source. But now we need to talk about the second type. And this one is even more dangerous because it often comes disguised as something positive, disguised as caring, disguised as genuine concern. The constant judge. This type of person lives in a permanent state of evaluation. Everything is judged, everything is compared, everything is categorized as right or wrong, better or worse, superior or inferior. There is no neutrality in this person's internal world, and when this person enters your home, they bring with them an invisible energy of a courtroom. You become the defendant, your home, your choices, your decor, your life. Everything goes on trial. And even if they don't say anything explicitly, you feel the weight of this constant evaluation. Eckhart Tolle identifies this as one of the strongest manifestations of the ego. He says in A New Earth that there is nothing that strengthens the ego more than being right. And to be right, someone needs to be wrong. To be superior, someone needs to be inferior. The constant judge needs to find flaws in others to sustain their own identity, to feel superior, to feed their sense of separation. Without it, their ego would collapse. What makes this type particularly dangerous for your home is the subtlety with which they operate. The constant judge rarely criticizes openly. They use more sophisticated techniques that most people don't even recognize. A look of disapproval, A charged silence after you share something. A poisoned compliment that hides a criticism. Seemingly innocent comments that plant seeds of doubt about your choices. Questions that seem genuine but carry implied judgment. It's a form of passive aggression that corrodes your confidence gradually. Remember when I talked about how presence attracts different reactions? The constant judge reacts to your light by trying to diminish it. If you are at peace, they'll question if you aren't being too passive, ignoring real problems. If you are happy, they'll suggest that you are ignoring important issues, living in denial. If you are growing spiritually, they'll insinuate that you are distancing yourself from reality, becoming alienated. There's always something wrong from the judge's perspective, because if there weren't, they'd lose their function. Studies in psychology from 2024 about toxic relationships confirm that prolonged exposure to this type of dynamic causes a decrease in happiness, an increase in shame, and difficulty in achieving personal goals. The impact is real, measurable, scientifically documented, and devastating for your journey of awakening, because you start to doubt yourself. You start to question your choices. You start to internalize the voice of the judge until it becomes your own inner voice. But Tolle offers a key fundamental to deal with this. He teaches that non-reaction to the ego of others is one of the most effective ways, not only to transcend your own ego, but also to dissolve the collective human ego. But you can only be in a state of non-reaction if you recognize that the person's behavior comes from the ego, that it's an expression of the collective human dysfunction. When you realize that it's not personal, that that person would judge anyone in your position, there is no more compulsion to react as if it were a personal attack. This completely transforms the dynamic. The constant judge needs your reaction to continue judging. When you don't give that reaction, when you remain in presence, observing without identifying with the judgment, the game is over. The energy that fueled the judgment simply dissipates. And often the judge themselves get confused because their usual tactic isn't working. Now I'm going to reveal the third type, and it's important that you pay close attention, because this is the most subtle of all, and possibly the most dangerous for people in the process of spiritual awakening, because it aims directly at your essence. The identity thief. This type of person operates in a completely unique way. They don't just want your energy like the emotional vampire. They don't want your validation like the constant judge. They want your identity, your essence, that which makes you you, that which makes you unique. How does it work? The identity thief normally appears as someone very interested in you, very attentive, very present. They ask deep questions. They want to know your most intimate thoughts, your opinions about everything. In the beginning, this seems positive. Finally, someone who really understands me, you think. Finally, someone who cares about who I really am. Finally, a genuine connection. But gradually, something starts to change. You realize that this person starts to adopt your opinions, your tastes, your phrases, your beliefs, even your way of speaking. In the beginning, it's flattering. You think it's a compliment, a form of admiration. Then it becomes strange, and eventually, you realize that you've lost something. A part of you has been absorbed. Your ideas are now her ideas. Your insights are now her insights. Even your personal stories are told by her as if they were hers. And curiously, you feel less yourself, more diffuse, less clear about who you are. This happens because the identity thief lives in a deep internal void. According to object relations theory mentioned in academic studies from 2024, Some people create a false self in response to early experiences of neglect or emotional rejection, an exaggerated and idealized image used to compensate for feelings of inadequacy. They don't have access to their own essence, because that essence was never allowed to develop. And to maintain this image, to have some form of identity, they need to constantly absorb characteristics from others. Tolle addresses this when he talks about how the ego creates identity through external identification, social status, possessions, relationships, beliefs, achievements. Everything becomes part of the self. Most people do this to some degree, but the identity thief takes it to the absolute extreme. They literally absorb the identity of those around them because they don't have access to their own essence. It's a void that needs to be constantly filled with pieces of other people. And here is the specific danger for your home. When this person enters your space, they are not just visiting, they are studying, absorbing, copying, cataloging every detail of your decor, every book on your bookshelf, every way you express yourself. And without realizing it, you start to feel increasingly diffuse, less clear about who you are, less connected with your own essence, as if parts of you were being slowly removed. The protection against this type, according to Tolle, lies in a deep anchoring in presence. He teaches a powerful technique in his lectures, maintaining awareness of the inner body, feeling the vital energy that flows through you. That is your anchor. And when you're anchored in that vital energy, in your deepest essence, no one can take away your identity because you're not identified with external characteristics. You are not your opinions. You are not your likes and dislikes. You are not your story. You are connected to something deeper, something that can't be copied or absorbed because it's not a thing. It's pure presence. Going back to what I said at the beginning about how your home can be the perfect setting for energy drain, now you understand why. In depth, your home is where you let your guard down, where you relax, where you open yourself up, where your natural defenses dissolve. And that's exactly why it's so important to be selective about who you allow into that sacred space. Your home should be your sanctuary, your place to recharge, not a place of drainage. Eckhart Tolle says something profound about this in his teachings. You protect your space, not out of fear, but out of devotion. Your home becomes a temple, your silence becomes a practice, your solitude becomes a teacher. You don't need to apologize for your boundaries. You don't need to justify your solitude. You don't need to explain why visitors drain you. Your energy belongs to you. Your internal space belongs to you, and it's your responsibility to protect it. But there's a trap here that I need to mention. Tolle warns about this clearly to avoid misunderstandings. He says that you may need to take practical measures to protect yourself from deeply unconscious people. You can do this without turning them into enemies, without hatred, without resentment. Your greatest protection, however, is to be conscious. Someone only becomes an enemy if you personalize the unconsciousness that is the ego. If you see as a personal attack what is actually a universal dysfunction. This is crucial to understand. When you recognize that the chronic emotional vampire, the constant judge, and the identity thief are operating from the ego, from the collective unconsciousness that affects all of humanity, you stop taking it personally. And when you stop taking it personally, the whole dynamic changes. You can establish boundaries without anger. You can step away without guilt. You can protect your space without creating conflict. Non-reaction is not weakness. It's strength. It's the strength of someone who is so anchored in presence that they don't need to react to the unconsciousness of others. It's the strength of someone who understands that fighting against evil can transform you into exactly what you're fighting. Tolle warns clearly that what you fight, you strengthen. And what you resist, persists. The only way to truly transcend these dynamics is through consciousness, not through conflict. So what's the practical answer? How do you protect your home from these three types without becoming paranoid or isolated, without closing yourself off to the world? The answer lies in the quality of your presence. When you cultivate presence daily, through meditation, through mindful awareness, through moments of inner silence, something magical happens. You develop a kind of natural radar. You begin to feel instantly who is operating from the ego and who is in a state of greater consciousness. It's not a judgment, it's a recognition, and it completely changes your interactions and your choices about who enters your life. With the chronic emotional vampire, you become a transparent wall. The negativity passes through you without affecting your essence. You listen without absorbing. You witness without getting involved. With the constant judge, you become a mirror. The judgment returns to the source. Without finding a target in you, you remain unshaken. Because you're not seeking external approval. With the identity thief, you become inaccessible in your essence. Your anchor is so deep in being that there's nothing on the surface to be absorbed. Your external characteristics can be copied, but your essence remains untouchable. And there's an unexpected bonus. When you change in this way, many of these people simply step away naturally. They lose interest because you no longer provide what they were seeking. The vampire doesn't find energy to drain because you don't enter the drama. The judge doesn't find a reaction to feed on because you don't seek their approval. The identity thief doesn't find identity to absorb because you're not identified with external things. And the genuine people, those who operate from greater consciousness, draw closer. Your presence attracts presence, your light attracts light, and your home truly transforms into a sanctuary, a space where consciousness meets consciousness. Before continuing, I want to take a pause. If this content is resonating with you, if you're recognizing these patterns in your own life, if something inside you is saying yes while listening to these words, it means something important. It means that you are awakening, that your consciousness is expanding, that you are leaving the automatic state in which most of humanity lives. And that has a value that few things in this world have. This channel exists to bring this kind of transformative knowledge. Knowledge that most channels don't share because it's too deep, too subtle, too challenging for the conventional mind. If you want to support the continuation of this work, if you recognize the value of it, the super thanks is a way of saying that this matters, that you're part of this journey of collective awakening. It's not payment for content. It's positioning. It's you actively choosing to be on the side of consciousness. Now let me give you something practical, something that you can apply starting today to protect your home and your energy. Tolle teaches a technique that he calls anchoring in the inner body. This is perhaps the most powerful tool that he shares. It works like this. Before anyone enters your home, before any important interaction, you close your eyes for a few seconds. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel your hands. Feel the vital energy that pulses inside you, especially in your chest and abdomen. And maintain this awareness of the inner body during the entire interaction. When you do this, something extraordinary happens. You don't lose your presence, even when the other person tries to drag you into the drama, even when they judge, even when they try to absorb your essence. You remain anchored in your body, in the present moment, in your vital energy. And from this anchoring comes your true protection, not a protection of resistance, a protection of presence. If you lose this anchoring during the interaction, if you notice that you've been dragged into a reaction, simply come back. Without judgment, without frustration, feel the body again. Reconnect with the internal energy and continue. With practice, this becomes automatic. Your nervous system learns to maintain this connection, even in challenging situations, and your home truly becomes impenetrable to unconscious energies. The signs that this is working are clear, and you'll recognize them quickly. You'll notice that your energy remains stable, even after difficult interactions. You'll notice that people who used to drain you now seem to have less of an impact. You'll notice that your inner peace becomes increasingly solid, regardless of who is or isn't in your home. You'll also notice that your interactions gain a different quality, more clarity, less drama, more being present. And the most beautiful thing of all, when you protect your energy like this, you're not just protecting yourself, you are contributing to the elevation of the collective consciousness. Each person who maintains a state of presence amidst unconsciousness becomes a point of light, a beacon. And enough points of light eventually illuminate the whole room, the whole world. There's one more thing I need to share before we wrap up, something that Eckhart Tolle mentions rarely, but it's absolutely crucial. Those three types of people we talked about aren't fixed categories. The same person can exhibit aspects of an emotional vampire in some situations, a constant judge in others, and an identity leech in still others. In fact, if you're completely honest with yourself, you'll probably recognize moments when you yourself have operated from each of these patterns. This isn't to create guilt, it's to create awareness. When you recognize these patterns in yourself, two things happen. First, you develop compassion for the people who operate this way, because you understand that they are trapped in unconscious cycles from which they can't escape on their own. Second, you become more vigilant about your own behaviors, avoiding falling into those same patterns when you interact with others. And in the end, that's the real protection. It's not about building walls, it's about elevating your consciousness to a point where these patterns simply don't find space to operate, not in others or not in yourself. Your home is an extension of your consciousness. When your consciousness is clean, clear, and present, your home reflects that, and the people who enter it, they feel it. Some will be uplifted by this presence, others simply won't want to stay, and so, naturally, without conflict, your personal sanctuary purifies itself. Now I need to hear from you. Of the three types I revealed today, the chronic emotional vampire, the constant judge, and the identity leech, which one do you recognize most clearly in your life? Which one has drained the most energy from you over the years? And more importantly, do you recognize any of these patterns in yourself? Comment down below and be completely honest, because recognition is the first step toward freedom. I read and respond to all the comments in the first couple hours, and your experience can help other people who are going through the same process of recognition and awakening.